Welcome to the Mentorlist, a source of sound advice with your host, David Lewis.
To seek support, and you need to allow yourself to be supported.
Really have a point of difference.
What is precious, what's really important, and then putting some boundaries there.
The Mentorlist specialises in interviews with top business minds. Gather their advice for your career. This is the Mentorlist.
Hi, today we are having a chat with Tony McGinn. Tony founded MCM Entertainment Group Limited at the ripe age of 22. Over more than 3 decades, Tony built MCM into a leading independent media company, acquiring considerable experience in establishing, growing and leading businesses in Australia, Europe and Asia. This included listing MCM on the Australian Stock Exchange via an IPO. In 2002, due to personal experience, Tony became involved in a leading, growing children's cancer charity and driving associated fundraising activities. This included the $1 Million Lunch, known as Australia's most spectacular and successful fundraising event, $15 million plus raised as at 2016. This is benefiting the Children's Cancer Foundation. So Tony's story is spread across this week and next week's episode, and I hope you enjoyed today's conversation with Tony McGinn. Tony McGinn, welcome to the Mentorlist.
Thank you very much, Dave.
My pleasure, and thanks for having me here at Work Club with you today.
No problems. It's nice surrounds, but the viewers can't see it, or the listeners can't see it.
That's true. I'll have to put a few pics online. Yeah, so thanks for your time today. And my first question I'd like to ask is just, can you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your story?
Melbourne born and bred, a second son in a family of 4, 2 sons and 2 daughters, or a brother and 2 sisters. Father was a banker, and my mother came from England. My dad came from Western Australia. I did some of my schooling years in England during my teenage years, and then returned back to Australia. My father was over there with his banking career. The family went over in the 70s. With lots of changes in school, I decided I didn't want to do university. I was originally going to be a landscape architect, and I was doing arts, and I got involved in running the student radio station at the university at RMIT. And so that took all of my passion and time, and I bailed on the course and started learning about radio and media. And that led to me getting some jobs in commercial radio, initially 3DB, Rhythm of the City, which is now what most people would know as Kiss FM. It changed to Double T FM and Mix FM and now Kiss FM. But originally 3DB, Rhythm of the City. And then I moved to 3AW. I was actually panel operating at 3AW for the likes of Peter Couchman, Darren Hinch, a lot of the talent that, became quite formidable in broadcasting over the decades. And then I got a job at Fox FM in sales and promotions. And Fox FM had just started. It was a brand new radio station. And I got fired from Fox by the sales director who, after, must have been about 12, 15 months, because he thought I couldn't sell. And he was probably right at the time, because no one had taught me to sell. So it was at that stage, I was 21 years of age, and it was that stage I came up with the idea of getting into media syndication, production and syndication. And at the age of 22, started MCM Entertainment, which became MCM Entertainment Group Limited. I think the original name was MCM Productions,
okay,
and then MCM Networking, and then MCM Entertainment. We just morphed a bit over the years. And, I ran that business from a blue-eyed, naive 22-year-old to a 55-year-old. So 33 years surviving recessions and ups and downs and global financial crises and many different changes on the journey, both globally and locally. And last year, we exited the last of our businesses, which is the original media business, by selling the operations to Southern Cross Austereo. So at the grand old age of 55, I've been reinventing myself, but I'm obviously drawing on a very deep and very broad media and entertainment journey over more than 3 decades that was fantastic.
Yeah, do you want to, maybe if we can go, we sort of mentioned 33 years, maybe if we could scratch the surface there and maybe talk through some of the highlight reels or sort of, looking back for you, 33 years in an industry, as you say, 3 decades, and then selling off last year. Yeah, do you want to talk through, was that always your intention or to eventually sell the business or?
Look, you obviously get some time to be retrospective and we're almost coming up to, at the time of recording this, it's June, so we sold the business or finalised that transaction on the media business in August 2016. So it's almost been 12 months, and obviously I've had a lot of time to think, to ponder, to not have regrets, and to dissect the journey, basically. And a lot of what I'm doing now in consulting and coaching and leadership mentoring has helped me in that dissection as well. And as I pick it apart and look at it, I kind of break business into 5 phases. The first phase is sort of sweat, grow, and learn, which is pretty obvious. The start is pretty much full of naivety, passion, persistence, and probably a little too much OCD. The second phase is sort of sweat, grow, because you're pushing a rock up the hill and you start to manage then. It starts to become a bigger enterprise and you continue to learn. The third phase is manage and then start to systemize. That's when you start putting systems into the business. It gives it stability and allows you to sort of reach beyond your grasp a bit and really grow and continue to learn. The fourth phase is about a bigger ambition. There comes a time when a business goes, well, we've kind of done this. What's next? And you look at sort of delegated authority. That's where you're starting to really build a management team. You're looking at maybe divisionalizing or siloing parts of the business or having separate companies. In our case, it was about building a group of companies. And obviously, you expand and continue to learn. Life is an endless journey of learning. And then there's phase 5 where you kind of sit there and go, so what's next? Is it about new markets? And obviously in an economy that's being, in a marketplace that's being disrupted left, right and centre, is it about buying? Is it about selling? Are you a buyer? Are you a seller? So are you setting yourself up for an exit? Do you merge? Do you JV? Do you float the business in an IPO? Of course, you continue to learn, but at that phase, at phase 5, there's a real importance around focus. That's probably the biggest lesson I've learned in my life. Companies are rarely great at doing lots of things. Most companies are really good at doing one thing exceptionally well, and the more they move away from that one thing, the more they can potentially damage that competency, but also chew up a lot of money and effort and time pursuing other aspirations. That's not to say a company should stick to its knitting. Innovation is absolutely core to survival these days, but it's about knowing what that one thing is. I did a lot of work with the Coca-Cola company around the world. In fact, they were our first client and our largest client for 12 years.
Right.
We would have made well over $100 million out of the Coca-Cola company around the world.
Yeah, you don't go anywhere without seeing Coke. I'm sure if we looked out the window, we'd be able to see their brand.
Absolutely.
Somehow.
Absolutely. And I ended up, presenting to presidents and vice presidents in the boardrooms of Atlanta on international projects and then executing those projects for them around the world, which was a lot of fun. And I learned a lot about markets and marketing from Coca-Cola. That was my marketing degree, working with the Coca-Cola company during a phenomenal growth period, particularly in international markets where they were growing outside of the States. Specifically, Europe was just where we spent a lot of our time working with them. And I started to think, what is Coke's competency? You might think it's the formula of Coke, the secret formula, the syrup that makes Coke. It's their marketing team, and that marketing is the secret. That's their core competency. Interestingly enough, I've seen the Coca-Cola company survive and prosper despite their marketing, because their marketing has not always been great. In fact, sometimes they've had spectacular failures, yet they've still grown and prospered. So after a while, you start to distill what is the core competency? What is the one thing the Coca-Cola company is exceptional at? And when you think it through and you work it out, what they're exceptional at is distribution. And it doesn't matter whether it's Coke, Powerade, water, Fanta, Sprite, fruit juice, doesn't matter. Once you've got that distribution machine running the world over, you can put anything through it. So as Coke moved away from distribution, where they got involved in things, they even bought movie companies.
Right.
You know, they owned Columbia TriStar at one stage. They realised they were not good at that, and they failed. What they are great at is distribution. Yeah, there's a lot of other things that they add to that, like good products, and although these days you could argue they're not all good products because of the issues with sugar and all the rest of it. But I mean, interesting enough, you know, some of the biggest selling products now are water.
Yeah.
So, but it's that distribution machine, that core competency that they have mastered worldwide that makes them such an incredibly powerful organisation.
Yeah.
So know what that one thing is you're great at, and be. Someone told me something the other day and it's the first time I heard it. In fact, it was only yesterday, and I love the saying: "Be extraordinary at the ordinary." And in distribution, that's what Coke has done.
Yeah.
So you know, even though when I talk about those 5 phases of business, the retrospective lesson I've learned is stay focused. Don't go too broad. Don't get outside of your core competencies too far, because you can't be great at everything.
Yeah, got it. Great advice. And yeah, I actually was reading about Coke and their distribution. It's, when you mentioned it, it sort of triggered a memory for me. And when they were, I guess, growing into the African continent, they were actually using some of the drug channels through some of the slums to get their distribution, because it was the only distribution networks that were available, and they were killing Pepsi in that because they weren't willing to sort of move into that local distribution. But just such innovative ways to push a product which is a good product. But
there's a wonderful story about Coke which I was told when I visited the office of their founding president, and they still have his desk set up in the tower in Atlanta, and the office with all these, it's like a museum. And the founding president of Coke was very, very close to the president of America at the time during the Second World War. And they were talking about the challenges of the war. And the president of America said to him, I'm really struggling to let our GIs know, in the front line, in the trenches, in the mud, in the war, in the blood, know that their country's behind them, their country's with them. I'd love to find a way to put a little piece of America in their hand every day, mum's apple pie kind of thing, that we're here, we know you're fighting for us. And you got to remember they were fighting on multiple fronts around the world in the Second World War. Well, the president of Coke said the best thing you can do is put a can of Coke in their hand, or a bottle of Coke. Obviously, they weren't cans then.
Yeah.
And guess what? The president of America said, that's what we'll do. And guess who financed the building of their bottling distribution system internationally beyond the US?
Uncle Sam.
And this is why Coke is bigger than Pepsi internationally. Right. In America, they're neck and neck. Outside of America, Coke slaughters Pepsi. Why? Because the government of America financed the build-out of Coke's distribution system internationally to put Coke bottles in the hands of US GIs in the front line. Wow. It's a great story.
Oh.
That's why they've got an amazing distribution system. One of the first global FMCG distribution systems in the world.
Yep. Wow. Massive leg up. So just if we're getting back to the 5 phases that you've mentioned, are you sort of saying that, we're either in one of the 5, or we've kind of spread across the 5 in different areas of the business? Or are you saying if we're focusing on one area and we've got that focus and we're doing what we do well, we will ideally be in one and only one of those sort of 5 phases?
No, not every business runs for over 3 decades. I don't know what the stats are now, but I remember a stat of yesteryear. They used to talk about most small businesses fail within 7 years. I would argue with digital startups and all sorts of disruption going on now, that's probably 2 years or 3 years. I don't know the stat, but it would be shorter. There are many businesses, that start and fail, and there's probably less consequences of the failure too. They're really just ideas innovating, and they either stick or they don't stick. And sometimes an idea maybe shouldn't be a business. Maybe an idea should be a product within another business. But what we are seeing in this digital age is democratization. Anyone can do whatever they want. They can start a media business in a garage and broadcast to the world. I couldn't do that in 1983 when I started MCM. I mean, we were shipping kilograms of Ampex 456 reel-to-reel tape air freight around the country to deliver programs to radio stations. And when we delivered the new program, the core program we launched the company with was Take 40 Australia, sponsored by Coca-Cola.
Wow.
Known at the time Coca-Cola Take 40 Australia. That was a 5-kilogram air freight satchel for a 4-hour program.
So this is the whole tape with all the songs on it, and then
fully produced show, everything, even the Coke ads in there, everything delivered to the radio station, and then they would hand the courier the last week's program to bring back, because the tape is worth hundreds of dollars.
Yep.
And we would what is called in the industry bulk erase it. So you'd run it over a magnet, which would make the tape blank, and we'd reuse it.
Gosh.
Because you couldn't just throw it away. Now you think of a USB stick, a flash drive, and it's disposable, and what those tapes held, you could put on a flash drive now. Last year, as we handed the business across to Southern Cross Austereo, the programs were being distributed as digital files direct to computers. So, the world changed dramatically. It went from tape to CD to digital file delivery over those 3 decades. But because of those barriers to entry, I mean, we had to learn how to distribute programming on a weekly timetable to, 200 radio stations around Australia and, 4VL in Charleville, and trying to make sure our Friday afternoons were sitting on the phone to couriers saying, we know it's left Brisbane, we know it's got to Toowoomba, but, it's got further to go to get to Charleville. So, and sometimes programs would be delivered a day late or delivered the morning of their broadcast. And we'd be speaking to the courier on Saturday morning going, please make sure you get it there by 10 a.m. because that's when the show goes to air.
Wow.
So that they were the barriers to entry back then.
Yep.
And once we built that distribution network for syndicating programs, one program weekly, the Australian Top 40, Take 40 Australia, you could then look at adding additional programs to that supply line.
Yeah, so if you've got the distribution network, then you can add another show that the courier's going there anyway. And
if Coke's delivering Coke, why can't it deliver water and Fanta and Sprite as well? We kind of took that view.
Yeah.
Ironically, our second program was sponsored by Diet Coke. So there's a little bit of a parallel there. Yeah, we built syndication. We pioneered radio syndication in the Australian radio market and became the biggest independent producer of radio programming pretty quickly, within 2 or 3 years, and remained that until last year when we sold the business.
Wow.
So when we sold the business, and for many, many years, we were probably pumping out well over 40 hours a week to 200-odd plus radio stations around the country.
So this is 40 hours that you're received from content creators, and then you're sort of...
No, we produced it all.
You've produced it.
We produced it all. A lot of household names in radio, My Generation, which still runs now, which is a sort of hits and memory show, soundtrack of our lives sort of thing. We launched a program in the 80s called RockSat, which was where, via satellite, because obviously, we didn't have all the sort of digital lines that we now have now and digital access to radio stations. So we'd satellite in artists and allow people to ring up on the phone and talk to those artists. So you could be asking Elton John or Phil Collins questions and whilst they're sitting in our studio, or indeed sitting in our London or LA studio. And so, there's lots. We created a whole string of programs. Australian Rock and Roll, The Best Years of Our Life, was an almanac of Australian music. My Top 10, where we spoke to zillions, many, many celebrities, and got them to pick their 10 favourite songs and do their own countdown,
Right.
which is fascinating stuff. The first 25 years of rock was something we co-produced from the libraries of the BBC, the Lost Lennon tapes, which we co-produced with our partners in America, Westwood One. There was some phenomenal content that we created over the years, and continued to reinvent all the time.
Fantastic. And so building this distribution network and having, I guess, a competitive advantage from your competitors and being able to syndicate, and then with technology coming in, I mean, the disruption there, do you want to talk through?
Well, initially disruption helped us. So, if you go back to my 5 phases of business, the naivety, passion, resistance at the start, persistence at the start is absolutely key. And I think anyone starting a business now I encourage them to use naivety to their advantage. If you speak to enough people, they'll talk you out of doing what you want to do. Making mistakes and actually not knowing is a real advantage when you're starting a business. Now, that's not to say it doesn't matter if you're stupid or if, you don't know it's not possible. There's a degree of research you need to do. But to give you an idea of naivety, when I started the business and came up with the idea of Take 40 Australia, I took the proposal to the Coca-Cola company, as we talked about them being our first client. Because we were pioneering what's called barter syndication, where you would make the programming available to the radio stations for no cash outlay, and in return, you would retain the sponsorship and some of the advertising rights in the show.
Right.
So they could still place ads in the show, but you would fund your operation and the supply of a high-quality program through your direct involvement with advertisers. And back then, you didn't have big radio networks. They were all individual radio stations. So it was like creating a daisy chain of syndication.
Right.
And if you've got suddenly, 120 radio stations running a program, to take that 120 stations and their audience for that program to an advertiser was a valuable proposition, because for them to sit there and buy 120 radio stations individually was a mean feat. So long story short, I looked up in what many of your listeners wouldn't even know now is called phone book, big thick thing of paper, and looked up the Coca-Cola company and rang them up and went to see them in Moorabbin in Victoria.
Right.
It was Coca-Cola Bottlers Melbourne. And I've pitched them Take 40 Australia. And I remember the guy now, Paul Gardner, lovely guy, head of advertising and promotions at Coke, Melbourne. And he said, I love the idea. He said, problem is, you've come to Coca-Cola Bottlers Melbourne. I said, I thought this was head office. It was Coke in Melbourne. That's how naive I was. I thought, well, that'd be the head office, wouldn't it? He said, our head office is actually Sydney, and that's the Coca-Cola company from the US, but there's actually 13 bottlers around the country.
Right.
And I said, well, tell me about that. He said, well, we put in 50 cents in every dollar, and the Coke company puts in 50 cents in every dollar in the advertising formula. So for us to fund something like this, you need 13 bottlers around Australia to agree to do it, and you need the Coca-Cola company to agree. They're all the stakeholders who will then fund it. And I've gone, wow, that sounds complicated. And he's then said, but the good news is you're sitting in the second largest bottler in the country, and we have a lot of swing. And I'm going to send you to the Sydney bottler now and the Coca-Cola company and tell them I want to do this.
Right.
And I've gone, Geronimo. I walked into Sydney, and literally the marketing director of the Coca-Cola company, America, their Australian operation, walked down the corridor and he said, I understand you've got something we should be very interested in. What a lovely way to start a presentation and a commercial relationship.
Yeah.
So it was my naivety, and you could even say stupidity, that set up that success. And ever since then, I really want people to learn from that. Just sometimes naivety can work absolutely to your advantage at the start of a business. But obviously, as you learn, it is very much about persistence. And, that second phase, you put in a lot more sweat. You start to learn to manage, because suddenly you got other people beside you. Initially, it's you and maybe a partner, maybe, one or two people, maybe a friend, whatever. Ideas usually pretty small. But as you start to bring on team members, you you need to learn how to manage, and you need to be really good at it. And then you need to systemize. So your earlier question was about, building that distribution system and learning how to cope with disruption, all the changes, or embrace disruption.
Yep.
That's where you start to systemize. You start to build systems into your business. And systems can be anything. They can be HR systems, they can be operational systems, they can be marketing systems, they can be, cultural systems, they can be innovation systems, systems that drive innovation. Most systems you build in a business revolve around people and the accountability of people and the performance of people. And not all systems, but most systems. And as you start to systemize, which is more the third phase of growing a business, as you start to systemize the business, you're actually, I liken it to putting the concrete between the bricks that are the foundations that allow the business to grow to the next stage.
Right.
If you try and grow too fast and you have not built the systems into your business, that's where you can come a cropper. Things can come undone. So we spent a lot of time in that sort of third phase of the business, and I would say this was the late 80s. We started in 83. I'd say this is the back end of the 80s and early 90s. We really started to systemize the business. And it was still very much an analog business then. It wasn't a digital business.
Yeah.
Digital really didn't come until the late 90s. Now, the CD came in the early 90s, obviously, the late 80s, early 90s, and we quickly moved to CD because, CD is a lot lighter than big Ampex 456 reel-to-reel tapes. So, and that, we were still, though, freighting programming weekly to radio stations all around the country.
I imagine that's probably a lighter package, or there's a cost saving there.
There was definitely a cost saving there.
Yeah.
I mean, in the early days when we were running the business out of a house in East Doncaster in the really early days, and this Ansett air freight, speak of the dead, Ansett air freight truck used to rock up 2 or 3 times a week and unload all these packages of tapes, and we'd load a whole lot more in. I swear to God, everyone on the street thought we were running a drug curing operation. Why? I mean, you imagine your next door neighbour having a freight truck turn up and just loading, almost pallets of air freight satchels in and out of the house, 2 or 3 times a week, every week of the year. It did look a bit sus.
Oh, great. Grassroots. Well, you got to start. So all companies sort of seem to start in garages. That's are the massive ones today. It's funny. Yeah. So just maybe if we could talk through the ASX listing of MCM and some of your experience.
Well, you get to phase 4 and 5 there, which is kind of phase 4 is where you have a bigger ambition and you start to move into delegated authority and expand and learn. And our phase 4 was to expand overseas. We had a foundation office in London where we were employing an expat Aussie to do a lot of interviews for us.
Yep.
And he encouraged me to go and have a look at the market and say, well, what you're doing in Australia, we could do here in Britain and potentially in Europe.
And is this when we're still in CDs or?
Yeah, this is late 80s. This is the CD era, late 80s. In fact, we first started putting our feet on the ground in London and Europe when the Berlin Wall was coming down. So there was this euphoria happening in Europe of being pan-European, the unification of Europe. And we jumped on that bandwagon. And we actually ended up launching with our first program over there called the Euro Chart. Why not reinvent Take 40 Australia and go with the Euro Chart, which was a top 40 songs in Europe, because there was a real euphoria about being European at that time. And lo and behold, Coca-Cola was our sponsor. And we ended up producing that program in 12 languages across Europe, which was fascinating. And we learned all the difficulties, like you'd write a script in English and then get it translated into German, and suddenly the script was 3 times longer because it takes a lot longer to say things in German than it does in English. So that would make the program. So we learned to write the script shorter for German, et cetera, et cetera. So there were lots of lessons learned, which is a lot of fun. And that phase 4 was a very exciting phase for us. We did a lot of amazing things over in Europe. Interestingly enough, I was sent over by the board to shut the business down on 3 occasions, and I'd come back and say I don't want to, and I'd fight them on it. And lo and behold, when Australia went into a gut-wrenching recession here in the early 90s, we picked up a massive project across Europe with McCann Erickson and the Coca-Cola company called Coca's the Music, and we ran that project, and it was a substantial project. It was like a $15 million US project. We ran that across 25 countries, and because of the success of that project, we were able to keep the Australian business alive, even though the Australian business was a stronger business and the original business, it was going through really tough times, and we were able to keep it alive because of the success of what we had in Europe. So there were real advantages in having both businesses back then. And then when we sort of moved through the 90s and into the early noughties, the world went digital. The dot-com era was upon us. And obviously we were a content company producing lots of content. We had moved into television at this stage and been producing television in Australia for about 10 years, mostly event television and music television. Mm-hmm. And we saw a real advantage in being a content company. And that first cycle of the dot-com, 2001, 2002, where everyone got, then there was the crash when the bottom fell out of the market. But that first cycle, we got very excited about what we could do being a digital business, because if you think about it, if you're syndicating to radio and television stations, your radio and television stations are actually your gatekeepers. If they don't want the program, you don't get an audience.
Yeah.
But with digital, you have the opportunity to go direct to the audience, to stream direct to the audience. So we got very excited about streaming technology, first with audio and then with video. And we invested heavily in it, and we became a very strong digital business. We were the leading music digital business in Australia with our digital websites and streaming services. And this is where, we started to this was our so what's next. And then we suddenly realized, well, if, this is phase 5 where we've been around for quite a while now. We'd been around for 20 years, and we saw the chance to go from being a contained company servicing a known media ecosystem to being an exponential business that can be borderless in a digital economy. So to do that, we thought, particularly after the dot-com crash, that as digital businesses started to build, we were doing well with our own business. We thought we need to build fast. If you look at any digital business, it grew fast, either through venture capital or acquisition or whatever. And we said, well, we want to be a leader in this space. So this is where we made the decision. We're not a seller, we're a buyer. And I think that's a very important decision to make at this stage in a business. Are you looking for an exit, or do you want to buy people who need or want to exit and aggregate and grow in size? And we wanted the latter. So the thinking was back then, and it was the right thinking, and I still believe it was, that if you had a digital business, Dave, and I came to you and said, I think your digital business is worth $1 million, and you said, well, no, I'm far more excited about it. I think it's going to be worth $100 million. If I offer you $1 million cash, you're not going to take it. But if I offer you $1 million stock, if your business is worth $100 million one day, you're going along for the ride. So I realized that it was not about buying digital businesses with cash. It was about buying digital businesses with stock, with a currency. And that is when we made the decision to list the company. And it was solely for that reason. We weren't listing a radio syndication company. We weren't listing a television production business. Yep. Yes, that was part of our ecosystem. We were listing a digital future, and we were going to aggregate digital businesses, media real estate in digital, in essence, and be a leader in that. And we set out to do that. There's only one mistake we made. We got the timing wrong.
Right.
Takes you a long time to get ready for a listing. We were ready for that listing at the end of 2007. In fact, we listed in December 2007 successfully. And if you follow the calendar closely, in March, April, May 2008, the world fell into the GFC.
Right.
as a newly listed company, no one wanted to talk to us,
Yeah, sure.
as in the market. In fact, no one was talking to anyone.
Yeah.
Everyone was selling everything. And of course, a lot of the breadth we got in shareholders in listing the company dissolved down and consolidated because people just sold out of everything because there was a panic. The lemmings were jumping off the cliff. And our share price didn't so much drop because, the control of the company was in the hands of, major shareholders. But what happened is we lost any chance of building liquidity in the stock. So we had a very illiquid stock. And if you want to use a currency to acquire businesses, you need a liquid stock.
Right.
Whether it's going up or down, it's being traded.
Yeah.
And our stock was not being traded. And it literally was almost 18 months before we got to start to talk to investment banks and advisors and stockbrokers and analysts about our plans and where we're going, because no one, literally for 18 months, wanted to talk to us. And by the way, they weren't talking to many people at all.
Yeah.
The world was in a horrible state in that public company market.
Yeah.
So our timing was atrocious. Silver lining, we went into possibly the world's biggest financial slump, which obviously had big consequences in Australia, big consequences around credit and debt, and we were debt-free and cashed up. So that was the upside.
Mm-hmm.
And then because we couldn't execute our original plan, because, we did buy one business for stock. Whether it was the right business or not is, up for debate. But, we did start to execute the plan, but it was very difficult to do what we wanted to do. So being a public company, and I would counsel anyone on this, that, once you're in the public domain, you're like a cat in a hot tin roof. You have to be doing something. You can't just sit on cash. We couldn't just sit there for 2 years and say, we're just going to keep the cash in the bank and earn interest and work it out later. You get a lot of pressure from shareholders saying, well, do something. You're meant to be building the business. So we started investing in digital technology, which we saw as a game changer for media. And we invested a lot of money in digital technology. And we got very close to exiting that business with a tremendous ROI. But sadly, what happens in the digital space is as soon as you start playing a digital game, you don't just look at what's happening in your country. You've got to look at what's happening in the world. And what was happening in the world at that time were the big utilities were starting to really grow and take over, a la Google, YouTube, Facebook, Amazon, Apple. And those utilities were starting to dictate terms to the content industry. Netflix, they were starting to dictate terms to the content industry of what the future was going to look like, which was for traditional businesses not that comfortable. There's many traditional media businesses that are in a lot of pain now because they've resisted that change. And at the time, we were investing in the very technology that would resource those digital business models for media companies. And we were very successful. We had a tremendous array of clients, but we couldn't get the global critical mass. If you're going to play a digital game, certainly the game we were playing, you got to know what stage you're playing on. And we were playing on a global stage. And truth be known, if you're going to play on a global stage, you need a much bigger access to capital, and you need much bigger brains at the table, neither of which we had. So, that's why we listed the business. Was there an upside to listing the business? Yes, to an extent. If I had my time again, would have I listed the business? No, I would not. And, talking to other listed companies and other organisations that have listed and entrepreneurs who have listed their business, I think if you want to play in the Australian market on the stock exchange, you need to be in the billion dollar club. It's not a place for $50 million, $100 million businesses. It's just not. We don't have a second market here as such, not a mature second market. So, it's really hard to get attention on the stock exchange unless you are in the $1 billion club or capable of getting into the $1 billion club. And I'm talking about market cap here.
Yeah.
Very swiftly.
Yeah. Yeah, great.
You do not want to be there as a business that's going to take some time to get to those sort of numbers.
Wow.
We were a micro cap, and micro caps don't get a lot of attention.
Yeah, in 2008 when everything's sort of falling over. Yeah, very tough time. So my next question was just about if we sort of step back a little and into a word that I always struggle with, which is philanthropy. I think I got it right. So back in 2002, you sort of headed in a new direction. The thing that springs to mind is lunch, and not because it's 12:30, but there's some other stuff that you've been pioneering in.
Yeah, I'm very proud of what I and others have done in this space. And when I say I and others, there's some fantastic people. In fact, after this recording, I have a board meeting this afternoon with some of those fantastic people at the Children's Cancer Foundation. In 2000, I came back from the European operation in 1997, and my first son was actually born in London. Benjamin was born in 1997, just before we came back. He, of course, now Britain's left the European Union. He can't get a European passport, which he's really pissed off about. So anyhow, when he was 3 years of age, literally the day after his third birthday, he was diagnosed with leukemia. And he was treated at Monash Medical Centre by Dr. Peter Downey, who's an amazing human being. And, when you are a parent of a child diagnosed with cancer, you are catapulted into a world that is just, totally foreign. And also being a father and being a businessman and a successful businessman, you think you can fix things. You think, you dealt problems every day and, you eat problems for lunch. It's part of, and you start to get a thicker and thicker skin. But suddenly you're dealt a problem you have no control over. You don't have choices. You're on a conveyor belt where, and you're learning stuff that is very foreign to you. I mean, unless you've got a medical degree, it's very foreign to you. So obviously that was lots of shock and horror. I turned my back on the business for a few months and focused entirely on that. And, it took its toll on us as a family. But fortunately, Ben, managed through it. And as a brave little lad at the time, he did very, very well and got through it and was cured. He's now a 20-year-old and all he wants is the car keys and my credit cards. So, all power to him. But during that journey, I realized as a businessman that the system's very imperfect, very, very imperfect.
Right.
In fact, flawed in many, many ways. And I started asking questions about it. And at the same time, I was meeting families that were not as fortunate as us. I mean, leukemia is an interesting cancer, or blood cancers, because in children, they are now the easiest to cure. The cure rates are up around 90-95%.
Wow.
But, in Ben's time, it was more like 80-85%. And but it's the most amount of drugs, or cocktail of drugs and chemotherapy. And it's the longest journey. It's 2 years, maybe longer, of chemo, and then 3 years of waiting for the all clear. So it's a long time you're involved in the system. So obviously we met a lot of people on that journey, other families, other children, and we saw children losing their lives and families losing their children, and that's heart-wrenching because we knew them well. And, when you're lying on hospital floors together and making coffee and tea and helping each other out, you get to know each other pretty well. And, the attrition and the imperfection of the system drove me as a businessman to say, how can I help? And I got involved in a parent support group called Koala, the Kids Oncology and Leukemia Action Group. And that was a bunch of mum and dads who started back in the 90s at Monash Medical Centre just to support each other because their kids were going through cancer treatment. So it was really a self-help group. What I saw as we pushed the hospital, we turned that group more into an advocacy. I was a member of that group. And then when the president, who is still on our board today, Andrea Diprose, her son relapsed and sadly lost his battle with cancer. And whilst he was going through his final days, it was a very tough time for Andrea. She resigned and handed the baton to me, and I took over. And it was then when I said, look, we need to give this thing some teeth. This needs to become more of an advocacy for the patients, for the kids, for the families. And I realised very quickly, if you're going to be an advocacy, you need money. You can't just run around and bang on doors. You get some sympathy because your child's got cancer or is fighting cancer, but you actually need some political capital. And political capital is, well, we'll co-fund, we'll help, we'll leverage in, but it has to be fixed. So I realised we needed funding and we needed recurring funding. And obviously being in the entertainment industry, I thought, well, I got a lot of contacts. When I was in London, I had gone to the Nordhoff Robbins lunch, which is a lunch adopted by the music industry in London. And, of course, the music industry in London is everything from Paul McCartney and, some of the, Genesis and Tony Smith and, some phenomenal managers and artists and record labels and, Richard Branson, the list goes on. So when that industry got behind autism as a cause, and the Nordhoff Robbins Foundation is a music industry adopted charity over there where they use music to help autistic children. And I went to their lunch and I saw some phenomenal money thrown around and raised over a good boozy lunch with the music industry. You can imagine the environment. And so I went to a very good friend of mine, one of my business partners or major shareholders in MCM remains Michael Gudinski. And I went to Michael's wife, Sue Gudinski, a dear friend of Amanda's and mine, and I said, Sue, I have an idea. Barry Bissell also, who was the original host of Take 40 Australia and worked with me for many, many years, and both of them have been to the Nordhoff Robbins lunch in London. And I said, our music industry isn't as big here in Australia, but what if we took the entertainment industry and put it together with the top end of Collins Street? And we came up with a really good event that could provide recurring funding for the foundation for these kids with cancer. Sue and Barry were amazing, and Sue started dragging in other people, and it grew. Scott Wyburn, very famous advertising guru, Peter Wynn, ex-Channel 9, one of the most famous executive producers in the 9 network. I brought in Bruce Keebor, who's Mr. Events, the big group, and, of course, also my sister, Sally Gobbo, and Marcus Moore at the time, who brought in Crown Casino, and we ended up with an amazing committee. And we sat down with this idea to have a lunch. And I originally thought it'd be to raise a couple $100,000 or something a year. And Scott Wyburn, God bless him, who is just a brilliant brand man. He's just a very, very clever advertising and brand man. He turned around, we're having lunch at the Flower Drum, and he said, we'll call it the $1 million lunch. And I turned around, I said, but Scott, if we call it the $1 million lunch, we have to raise $1 million. He said, exactly.
Yeah.
Build it and they will come. And I said, oh my God. And I've looked at everyone, and everyone was looking at each other. Maybe we'd had too much wine, but we signed on.
Right.
And we launched the lunch, and the first lunch raised $1,001,000.
Wow.
Now, the interesting thing is that all we ever paid for was the serving staff on the day who served the lunch. The entire event, all the food, all the beverage, everything was donated. And that was the premise we set it up as, so that it was a really effective fundraiser. There's a lot of fundraisers out there that cost almost as much to stage as the money they raise. And to put that in perspective, the $1 million lunch I ran for 10 years as chairman of its committee and executive produced the lunch with obviously a changing committee over that decade. But at the end of that decade, through the help of James Roach, we were introduced to the AFL, and we got the AFL Commission to agree that the office of CEO of the AFL would be our patron of now what is known as the Children's Cancer Foundation. And that's Gil McLaughlin's office. So even if Gil McLaughlin's not in it, that office is still patron of the Children's Cancer Foundation. And as our patron and partner, the AFL agreed to take on the running of the lunch 3 years ago, and which was fantastic because after 10 years it was killing me and others. There's an enormous amount of effort, volunteer effort that goes into it. And of course, the AFL, last time I checked, is one of the best little black books in the business. And the $1 Million Lunch, the first year the AFL took it over, made over $2 million in 3 hours.
Wow.
And here's the catch. It cost $0.
Yeah.
So that $2 million goes straight into the Children's Cancer Foundation, which only has 4 staff.
Right.
And all of its board of volunteers. And we are now the single biggest funder of recurring programs beside the state government in the Royal Children's Hospital, Monash Medical Centre and beyond, or Monash Children's Hospital, beside the state government's paediatric integrated cancer services. I'd like to position it as we're the cotton wool that helps protect the families and the children as they go through the toughest journey in their lives. And, the real reward there is that we set up something that is now an institution in Melbourne and is recurring. And if you want to really make a difference in this space, you need recurring funding. And now we work very closely with the My Room Foundation, and we also help administer their fundraising through our grants committee. And it's just a really exciting journey. That when I say exciting the changes we're making. And we're obviously still dealing with some very serious stuff, but it's really exciting and really warming to see what's happening. And I could not be prouder about what a great team of people have done.
Fantastic. Yeah, what a great segue. I'm really glad I asked the question there.
Well, it's in what is 12 years. It'll be the 13th lunch this coming August.
Right.
The 12 lunches that we've done have raised over $16 million. So that's no mean feat.
Wow. Yeah, so I guess my next question is just, so thinking back to when you were 22 or thinking back to in 2002 when you're about to start, these businesses that you've founded or these causes or for these things that you get behind seem to have really big growth. And is there any advice that you could share with someone that?
I'm a serial entrepreneur. I mean, right. Karl Lagerfeld once said you got to reinvent yourself 7 times in your life. I watched a documentary on the History Channel on him. It was very interesting, actually. I don't think I could stand doing the same thing over and over again. If I look back over my media career, I did reinvent myself. The business did radio, then it did television. We did event sponsorship and event production. We then moved into marketing services. We moved into media technology, in a tech business, a global tech business. So there was lots of reinvention. Some of it very successful, some of it not so successful. And you learn as much from your failures as you do from your successes. And that's where I take that sort of helicopter view and a retrospective view now is remember what you're good at and leverage what you're good at. The further you reach outside of your knowledge area, the tougher the challenge is. So, and particularly in disrupted markets and when there's a lot of disruption around. Disruption creates opportunity, but also creates, the disruptors can be disrupted themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, our media tech business was a disruptor, but bigger businesses disrupted us. And it's a game we couldn't win in the end. So I do think you need to continue to innovate and reinvent yourself, but unless you're exiting businesses and starting new businesses and learning afresh, if you're staying in an industry or around an industry, you want to remember what you're good at and leverage that. Yeah. You can innovate a product. Use the Coke example. If distribution is the critical success factor you've absolutely nailed, then the innovation is obviously making sure that system stays world-class, and that distribution system is a leading system and gives you that sustainable competitive advantage. But then there's a whole lot of innovation you can put through that distribution network. You can leverage that distribution network by innovating product for it or acquiring product or whatever the case may be. Now, when Coke stepped out and said, well, let's buy a movie company and make movies because we should be in the entertainment business, they failed. because it wasn't leveraging what they were good at. So I'm all for innovation. I'm all for reinventing. I'm all for trying new things, but focus is still key. Focus on your key strength. Know your key strength and focus on your key strength as an individual, as a business, as an enterprise.
Yeah, great advice. So just my next question is around habits. So is there a habit that you've picked up or habits that you've sort of brought along the way that you think have contributed to your successful journey?
Email is not management. Don't manage by email. I often draw the analogy that if you go back to, and when we started the company, God, we had a telex machine. Ticker, ticker, ticker. That's how we communicated. We didn't have Windows, Microsoft Windows. We didn't have Apple. I mean,
What do you mean when you say email is not management?
Well, there's a lot of people sitting at their desks right now managing their businesses by email.
Right.
If you go back to when we had paper and a memo would get put in an in tray on a desk, this thing really old school here, think how many pieces of paper would be on your desk in a day. In some of these bigger enterprises, you're talking about telephone book sizes of paper, of people just cluttering up the system with emails. So my habit that I learned was the more emails you answer, the more you get. The more emails you send, the more you get. So be really, really selective in who you email and why you email. And one of the lessons I learned on that is that I would sit on flights on business and, you'd finally want to catch up on all your emails. And if you speak to any business person these days, where do they do most of the catching up on their emails? Normally on a plane. And they sit there and they beat out a whole lot of replies and they think, my God, my work's done. I've cleared the community. I've got a zero inbox policy. I'm on top of everything.
Yeah.
And they land, go to the hotel, connect, and they use about 20 gigs as they send out all those emails.
Yeah.
And, of course, they go to bed because they're in a different time zone. They wake up in the morning and there's 400 emails in their inbox. By going out with all of that, it all comes back.
Yeah, good point.
So, the old analogy of monkeys on your back, you as a leader, you want to get the monkeys off your back. Simon Sinek says it really, really well, really, really well. He says that your job as a leader, and I'm specifically talking CEOs here, is not to do a lot of the work, is not to, be responsible for all of the results, to not get your hands dirty on all of the stuff that you get involved in.
Yeah.
Your job as a leader is to manage the people who do that. One of the worst ways you can manage is email. And one of the worst ways you can get a whole lot of work thrown back at you, get all those monkeys thrown back on your back, is by doing it via email. So the habits I learned was minimize email.
Yeah. Well, I feel very privileged now that you've answered one of my emails and come on the show. But we did have a conversation first, so maybe that's the key. So yeah, you mentioned Simon Sinek. Is there a quote that he's got a lot of great quotes out there, but is there one that's resonated with you that you'd like to share with listeners?
It wasn't the first one I was thinking of, but I think it's the one that's most relevant to what got me through. I don't know who said it, but very early on, I was told that ideas without action will not get results. And I know it sounds really 101 simple, but there's a whole lot of people out there who have a whole lot of ideas. The ones that succeed or fail, and there's nothing wrong with failure, the ones that succeed or fail are the ones that apply action to the idea. Act on it. And if you're going to really pursue an idea, you're going to do something about it every day, every hour. It keeps you awake at night.
Yeah.
If it's a good enough idea. There's plenty of dreamers out there. I've got a great idea. One day I'd like to. But if you're going to turn a dream into a goal, into a reality, you've got to act. You've got to have action and, persistent action to hone it and do something about it. And, you can link that one with the age-old quote that luck is preparation meeting opportunity. So if there'd be plenty of people out there who said, I had an idea similar to that. I've missed the boat. It's already gone.
Yeah.
Well, if you'd done something about it, you might have actually been prepared to meet the opportunity when it arrived.
Yeah, I've actually had that a few times.
Yeah.
Various people.
So those two, resonate with me a bit.
Yeah, fantastic. And I can see why, sort of looking now that we've just gone through your journey as well, why those ones in particular have resonated with you. And just if you could share a book, so was there one that you picked up that you think helped through your career?
It's probably more a latter book, because what I'm doing now is through my career, my strong suit was, apart from being creative, you have to be creative to be in the content business and the media and entertainment business. And I love being creative, but I'm not a pure creative. I suppose what I did the most of, and why our business lasted for over 3 decades and grew and prospered in many, many different ways, is because, my strong suit is sales and business development. I'm now consulting in businesses in sales and business development. When we sold the last of the businesses last year, I decided I wasn't going to stay with media, although still interested in investing in media content ideas, and we've got some pots on the stove there, but not running a media operation. And, I could have gone and got another CEO position in media. I could have got on boards. I could have consulted media. Media is in a pretty tough space at the moment. It's heavily disrupted, and it's got a long way to go to work out what it looks like in the future. There's too much change happening. So, and after over 3 decades in media, I thought, well, I'd like to broaden my horizons. So I'm consulting business in general in sales and business development, specifically looking at what I call performance protocol and performance reinforcement. Now, I'm not going to go into that in detail now. That's the subject of a separate podcast maybe. But there's a book that I'm reading right now that I really am captivated with, which is The Challenge of Sale.
The Challenge of Sale. Okay.
The Challenge of Sale. It's 2 authors. I can't remember their name off the top of my head.
That's okay. I'll link to it on the site. But
The Challenge of Sale, and it's one of the best. It's based on really comprehensive research too, global research, and it is, because there's plenty of spin doctors in the sales game, and I'm anti, sales training. Yeah. That what I call the booster shot of sales and business development, where everyone high fives, has too many beers after the conference, and then goes back to what they were doing. The Challenge of Sale is about wholesale change and makes you rethink it. It also means that a lot of people that are in sales and business development probably shouldn't be in sales and business development.
Right.
So it's a great book. And look, anyone who's starting a business or leading a business, I'm sorry, sales and business development is core to that leadership role. Yep. It's not the only thing you do, but it's core. I mean, the CEO of any business is the number one salesman.
Yeah.
So understanding the challenge of sale and what that offers, I think, is a real advantage for leaders.
Yeah, well, you've definitely sold it to me. I'm going to pick it up on the way home. Challenge of Sale, fantastic. Yes, I'll link to that up on the mentorlist.com.au, and also have the sort of show notes and links to other episodes. But yeah, just wanted to thank you again for your time today. And for those that are listening in, and I certainly resonated with your story, but they want to find out a bit more about you online or even contact you, how would they go about that?
They can contact me on my email, which is tony@McGinnPartnership.com, McGinn. That's my consulting business. We the website is a work in process right now. It will be up by August around the consulting services that I'm offering. They can also contact me through the Executive Connection. The Executive Connection is the largest CEO peer mentoring network in the world, 22,000 members in 16 countries. And here in Melbourne, I'm just launching a new group of CEOs and chairing that group. So I'm a chair for the Executive Connection, or TEC as it's known, and they can reach me through TEC as well.
Right, fantastic. Well, yeah, thanks again. And yeah, I'm just fascinated by your story. I know I could keep asking you questions all day, but I better let you go. I know you've got a board meeting to get to. And,
Thank you, Dave, very much, and a great initiative what you're doing here. A really good initiative, and I'll do whatever I can to help you grow it. I think it's a really nice niche you've got, and good luck with it.
Thank you very much.
Thank Thank you for listening to The Mentorlist with your host, David Lewis. If you like what you're hearing on The Mentorlist, the best way to support the show is to just take a few seconds to leave a rating and/or comment over on iTunes. You can also find further information about this show and links to further episodes at mentorlist.com.au. Until next time, this is The Mentorlist.